In December 1941, 4 days after Pearl Harbor, Adolf Hitler made a decision that professional military advisors had explicitly warned against. He declared war on the United States. Germany was not obligated by treaty to do so. Japan had attacked America, not the other way around. German military planners had calculated that bringing American industrial capacity into the war would create a material imbalance that Germany could not overcome. Their assessments were clear: America's production potential exceeded Germany's by factors of 5 to 10 to 1. Economic advisors presented data showing American steel production alone was greater than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. Hitler dismissed these warnings. He believed America was weak, racially divided, and incapable of projecting military power effectively. That declaration, made without strategic necessity and against all professional advice, guaranteed that Germany would face an enemy whose industrial capacity would eventually bury the Wehrmacht under sheer weight of material. The decision was not forced by circumstances. It was chosen, and it was catastrophic. German leadership's understanding of America was shaped more by ideology than by factual assessment. In Nazi racial theory, America was a mongrel nation weakened by racial mixing and Jewish influence. German propaganda portrayed American society as decadent, divided, and lacking the martial spirit necessary for modern war. Hitler personally believed that America's ethnic diversity made it incapable of unified national effort. He saw American democracy as weak and inefficient compared to totalitarian systems. German military intelligence reports that contradicted this view were dismissed as defeatist. The image of America that shaped German strategy was not based on objective analysis of American industrial capacity, population, or economic resources. It was based on ideological assumptions about racial superiority and political systems. This was not intelligence failure in the conventional sense. It was the deliberate rejection of intelligence because it contradicted ideological certainty. Germany was making strategic decisions about a major power based on what leaders wanted to believe rather than what evidence showed. German military intelligence had access to accurate information about American industrial capacity. Reports documented American steel production, which exceeded all Axis powers combined. Assessments detailed American automobile manufacturing, which produced more vehicles annually than Germany's entire industrial output. Intelligence estimated American shipbuilding capacity based on existing commercial yards. Economic analyses calculated American GDP and industrial potential. All of this information was available to German leadership. Professional military planners used this data to project what American mobilization would mean for the war's material balance. Their conclusions were mathematically clear: if America entered the war and mobilized its economy, the Axis would face material superiority that could not be overcome through tactical excellence or operational brilliance. These assessments were not speculative. They were based on documented American production figures that were publicly available. The information existed. The question was whether leadership would accept what the information showed. When German military planners presented assessments showing American industrial superiority, Hitler's response revealed the fundamental problem: he did not dispute the numbers, he disputed their relevance. Hitler argued that material production meant nothing without the racial and spiritual qualities necessary to use it effectively. He believed that German soldiers were individually superior and that this superiority would overcome numerical disadvantages. He pointed to Germany's victories over numerically superior enemies in 1940 as proof that material balance did not determine outcomes. This was not reasoned strategic analysis. It was ideological faith that willpower and racial superiority could overcome industrial capacity. The Nazi worldview made it impossible to accept that American democracy and racial diversity might be strategic advantages rather than weaknesses. Professional military officers who argued that America's industrial potential represented an existential threat were accused of defeatism. The ideological framework through which German leadership understood the world made accurate strategic assessment of America impossible. German Navy leadership understood exactly what American entry would mean. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder had calculated that American shipbuilding capacity could replace any losses Germany inflicted on Allied shipping faster than submarines could sink vessels. He warned that declaring war on America would guarantee Germany lost the Atlantic. Luftwaffe logistics officers noted that American aircraft production already exceeded German output before mobilization. They projected that American mobilization would create air superiority that Germany could not contest. Army economic planners calculated that American tank and vehicle production would eventually equip Allied ground forces with overwhelming material advantage. These warnings were specific, documented, and unanimous among professional military staff. They recommended avoiding war with America at almost any cost. If war became unavoidable, they recommended delaying American entry as long as possible to complete operations in the East before facing American industrial mobilization. The professional military consensus was clear: bringing America into the war was strategic suicide unless Germany could achieve decisive victory before American production reached Europe. Hitler's declaration of war against the United States in December 1941 was not required by Germany's alliance with Japan. The tripartite pact obligated mutual defense if a member was attacked, but Japan had initiated hostilities against America. Germany had no treaty obligation to declare war. German military planners had explicitly recommended that Germany not declare war even if Japan did. They argued that American focus on Japan gave Germany time to complete operations in Europe. Declaring war would redirect American attention and resources toward Europe immediately. Every strategic consideration argued against the declaration. Hitler made the decision anyway. His reasoning was partly ideological. He wanted to demonstrate solidarity with Japan and show strength. He also believed that America would inevitably enter the European war regardless of formal declarations, so declaring war first had propaganda value. Most fundamentally, he did not believe America represented a serious military threat. The declaration was made casually, without extended strategic debate, because Hitler was certain it did not matter. American industrial mobilization exceeded even the most optimistic Allied projections and the most pessimistic German fears. In 1942, America produced more military aircraft than Germany and Japan combined. By 1943, American shipyards were launching more tonnage in 1 month than German submarines could sink in 3. Tank production reached levels where America could afford to equip not just its own forces but British and Soviet armies as well. The scale of American mobilization was unprecedented in history. Automobile factories converted to tank production. Commercial shipyards built aircraft carriers on assembly lines. The industrial capacity that German intelligence had documented proved conservative compared to what America actually achieved once fully mobilized. German military planners watched the production figures with growing alarm. The material balance they had warned about in 1941 was manifesting as reality by 1943. But by then, the decision to bring America into the war could not be reversed. The Battle of the Atlantic demonstrated German miscalculation in concentrated form. German submarine warfare was technically sophisticated and tactically effective. U-boats sank enormous tonnages of Allied shipping. But American and British shipyards were building replacement vessels faster than submarines could sink them. By 1943, Allied shipbuilding exceeded losses by millions of tons annually. German submarine production could not keep pace with losses to Allied anti-submarine warfare. The mathematics were inexorable. Allied industrial capacity was producing ships faster than German industrial capacity could produce submarines, and each submarine cost more resources than each merchant ship. Admiral Raeder's warnings proved accurate. The submarine campaign that was supposed to starve Britain into submission was instead bleeding Germany's naval resources while Allied merchant fleets grew larger. German naval leadership understood they were losing an industrial race they had warned could not be won. But the strategic decision to fight that race had been made in December 1941. German air superiority over Europe eroded not primarily from tactical failure but from production disparity. American factories produced over 300,000 military aircraft during the war. Germany produced approximately 120,000. By 1944, American and British air forces could replace losses at rates that made Luftwaffe attrition warfare unwinnable. German fighter pilots shot down Allied bombers at impressive ratios, but Allied factories replaced those bombers within weeks while Luftwaffe losses could not be replaced as quickly. German aircraft were often technically superior individually, but technical superiority meant nothing against 5-to-1 numerical odds. The Luftwaffe that had dominated European skies in 1940 was ground down not because German pilots lost skill but because American industrial mobilization produced replacement aircraft faster than Germany could shoot them down or build replacements for its own losses. The air war became a battle of production capacity, and America's industrial mobilization had made that contest unwinnable for Germany from the moment war was declared in December 1941. By 1944, the material consequences of American mobilization were visible on every front. Allied forces in Western Europe operated with complete motorization. Every unit had trucks, every advance had logistical support, every operation had adequate fuel and ammunition. German forces increasingly relied on horses for transport. American production equipped Allied armies with overwhelming artillery, constant air support, and material abundance that allowed commanders to use firepower rather than manpower. German forces fought with tactical skill but could not overcome situations where every artillery duel was lost because Allied ammunition supplies were effectively unlimited while German supplies were not. The ground war had become industrial warfare where victory went to the side that could bring more steel to battle. American mobilization had created exactly the material imbalance that German planners warned about in 1941. German soldiers were not fighting poorly. They were fighting outnumbered in every category of equipment by margins that tactical excellence could not overcome. American industrial mobilization enabled strategic bombing campaigns that Germany simply could not match or defend against. The United States produced heavy bombers in quantities that allowed daylight precision bombing despite heavy losses. American factories replaced bombers faster than German defenses could shoot them down. The 8th Air Force over Europe and Mediterranean air forces conducted sustained campaigns that destroyed German synthetic fuel production, crippled transportation networks, and demolished industrial capacity. Germany could not retaliate in kind because Germany lacked the industrial capacity to produce strategic bombers in necessary quantities while also maintaining fighter defense, ground forces equipment, and naval forces. The bombing campaign was possible only because American industrial mobilization could simultaneously equip ground forces, maintain naval superiority, and produce strategic air forces. Germany faced enemies who could afford to use industrial capacity in multiple theaters simultaneously while Germany was forced to choose between competing priorities with limited resources. American industrial capacity allowed the Allies to prosecute simultaneous major offensives on multiple fronts, something Germany could not do despite earlier territorial conquests. Allied operations in Italy, France, and continuing support to Soviet forces were all sustained by American production. Germany faced enemies who could open new fronts without weakening existing operations because American factories produced enough equipment to supply multiple theaters simultaneously. When Germany concentrated forces to counter one threat, American industrial capacity enabled Allies to maintain pressure elsewhere. The strategic flexibility that material abundance provided was something Germany never possessed. German forces were repeatedly forced to choose which front would receive inadequate reinforcements because total production could not meet all requirements. Meanwhile, Allied forces operated with the strategic freedom that came from knowing American factories could sustain operations everywhere. This advantage was not primarily tactical or operational. It was industrial, and it existed because American mobilization created material abundance that Germany could not match. German leadership's failure to accurately assess American power was not lack of information. Intelligence was available and was presented by professional military and economic advisors. The failure was refusal to accept what intelligence showed because it contradicted ideological assumptions about racial superiority and political systems. This was not unique to assessment of America, it was a pattern throughout Nazi strategic thinking. Intelligence that contradicted ideology was dismissed as defeatist. Professional advice that recommended caution was interpreted as lack of faith. The result was that Germany made strategic decisions based on what leadership wanted reality to be rather than what reality was. The December 1941 declaration of war against America was simply the clearest example of this dysfunction. Every factual assessment said not to do it. Every ideological assumption said it did not matter. Ideology won, and the consequences were catastrophic. The lesson was not that Germany lacked capable intelligence services or professional military planners. The lesson was that accurate intelligence means nothing if leadership refuses to accept assessments that contradict ideological certainty. The final production statistics documented exactly what German planners had warned about in 1941. America produced approximately 300,000 aircraft during the war. Germany produced 120,000. America built roughly 2,500 major naval vessels. Germany built several hundred. American tank production exceeded 100,000 vehicles. German production was approximately 50,000. American GDP during the war was larger than all Axis powers combined. These were not marginal advantages. These were overwhelming disparities that made sustained industrial warfare unwinnable for Germany once American mobilization reached full capacity. German forces fought with skill and achieved tactical successes, but tactical excellence cannot overcome 5-to-1 or 10-to-1 material disadvantages indefinitely. The production numbers that German economic advisors had presented in 1940 and 1941 proved conservative compared to what America actually achieved. The strategic assessment that bringing America into the war would create an unbeatable material imbalance was completely accurate. The decision to declare war anyway was made by leadership that refused to believe industrial capacity determined modern war outcomes. Military historians analyzing Germany's strategic options in 1941 consistently note that not declaring war on America was possible and strategically advisable. Germany had no treaty obligation to do so. American focus was on Japan after Pearl Harbor. Delaying American entry into European war, even temporarily, would have given Germany more time to complete operations in the East without facing American industrial mobilization. The decision to declare war was voluntary and unnecessary. If Germany had not declared war in December 1941, America might still have entered the European war eventually, but the timing would have been different and possibly more favorable to Germany. This is not alternative history speculation, it is recognition that Hitler made an active choice to bring America into the war immediately rather than allowing circumstances to develop. That choice was made against all professional advice and was based on ideological assumptions about American weakness. The counterfactual reveals that Germany's strategic position was made worse by a decision that served no military purpose and was made purely for ideological and propaganda reasons. The German misreading of American power demonstrates what happens when ideological certainty replaces factual analysis and strategic decision-making. Germany possessed accurate intelligence about American industrial capacity. Professional military and economic advisors correctly assessed what American mobilization would mean. But leadership made decisions based on ideological assumptions about racial superiority and political systems rather than on empirical evidence about production capacity and economic resources. The result was that Germany voluntarily brought into the war an enemy whose industrial capacity eventually buried the Wehrmacht under material superiority that could not be overcome. This was not unavoidable fate or bad luck. It was the predictable consequence of decision-making that prioritized ideology over intelligence. The pattern appeared throughout Nazi Germany's strategic choices. When facts conflicted with ideology, ideology determined policy. Professional expertise was subordinated to political certainty. The cost was measured in strategic catastrophes that were predicted by professionals but occurred anyway because leadership refused to accept assessments that contradicted what they wanted to believe. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the consequences of declaring war on America in December 1941 were impossible to deny. American industrial mobilization had equipped Allied forces on every front. American production had created material superiority that German forces could not overcome despite tactical skill and operational competence. The strategic warnings that professional advisors delivered in 1940 and 1941 had proven completely accurate. American industrial capacity had indeed created an unbeatable material imbalance. The racial and political weaknesses that Nazi ideology attributed to America had proven non-existent. American democracy had mobilized more effectively than totalitarian Germany. American racial diversity had not prevented unified national effort. Every ideological assumption that led Hitler to dismiss American power had proven false. Every factual assessment that professional advisors provided had proven accurate. The decision to declare war on America was not forced by circumstances or treaty obligations. It was chosen voluntarily based on ideological certainty that industrial capacity did not determine modern war outcomes. That certainty was wrong, and the cost was Germany's defeat by an enemy whose power German leadership had refused to acknowledge despite all evidence and professional advice showing exactly what declaring war would mean.